The following thoughts on Happy Hour do not represent Cox Media Group or its sponsoring. Anything you hear may and will be used against you. Thank you. Voted as best local podcast in Tampa Bay by the Creative Loafing. You're listening to Happy Hour.
Are you feeling classy today? Sit down, pour a glass of wine, and listen to Happy Hour.
You're tuned in to Happy Hour, an hour where Happy rants about something. Sit back and listen in. Happy Hour is on now. Happy Hour is on now.
What up? What is happening? This is Happy Hour. I am your host, Ryan Hoppe. And on the phone line, I am very honored and very pumped about this guest. From the award-winning A Mediocre Time with Tom and Dan, the host, Tom Vann, is on Happy Hour. What's up, dude?
What's going on, dude? How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. I'm a big fan of what you guys do with your podcast because there are so many podcasts out there that it's very hard to get your name out there. So I love what you guys do by monetizing it and having a fan base and making money off of it. So this is a really big honor to have you on my podcast.
Well, dude, I appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me on. It's with podcasting, it's odd, as you know. I mean, you do it all the time. It could either be, a huge, you're talking about Mark Maron, who interviewed President Obama, or you could, it could be some dude that's doing it in his basement and for fun, and he's got his family and his friends listening, and they could both be in iTunes. And there's really, besides from iTunes, order of who's got the most listeners or whatever, you're both basically on the same level at that point, which is it's odd in this day and age of podcasting. Before, as you know, in radio, if you had if you got on an AM or FM station, that meant you went through a bunch of processes to get on a radio station, a signal. But with podcasting, it's pretty cool that anybody can do it, and you can be on the same platform and the same distribution as the biggest in the game, and then it's just about how many people you can get to listen to your show,
Now, I'm 22 years old, and I've been doing the show for 6 months, and my ultimate goal is to have a morning show slot. Like, I'm reaching for the top of the barrel when it comes to radio. What was your ultimate goal? After working in radio for so long, where did you want to see Tom and Dan go, and is it at where you thought it would be, or is it even farther?
Well, it's funny because we work backwards in the fact that there's a lot of people that start out podcasting. Their goal is to get into radio, and I guess get a deal from a big distribution wise, you get an iHeartRadio or Cox or any other radio station. It's you get the most amount of listeners because of their promotional power. But we kind of work backwards in the fact that we were on a morning show and it was number one, and all we wanted to do is, get out of radio and be able to get into podcasting, because we knew that there was, money to be made, and there's also an audience, and we knew that everything's eventually going towards Wi-Fi radio and or Wi-Fi distribution. If you can get your content on the internet, you're reaching more people than you could even do with terrestrial radio, because if you look at the numbers, more people have iPhones or smartphones than have a car, so if you can get your content available on a medium where someone can reach it through a smartphone, like your Android phone or iPhone, you could possibly reach more people than getting an AM FM signal. I joke, me and Daniel joke around all the time, who has a radio in their house anymore, or everybody's got a radio in their car, but how many people do you know have smartphones, whether it be an Android phone or an iPhone? That's way more than even people that have cars. So if you can do a show like you're doing, and anybody can listen to your show through a smartphone, then you have the ability to reach more people than even AM and FM radio. So for us, we realize the power behind, the internet. That sounds corny to say, but we can reach just as many people as anybody could on the radio, especially since radio now is going all towards Wi-Fi anyway. And there's a reason why Clear Channel changed their name to iHeartMedia, is because they are eventually going to go to iHeartRadio exclusively, I imagine, in the future, because it's cheaper to broadcast, rather than a big tower that puts out, radio waves, AM and FM. Like, that's ridiculous. If anybody thinks that's going to be here in 50 years, I personally, and everything's leaning towards, like, everything's going to be Wi-Fi and everything's going to be internet. It's not going to be AM and FM in the future.
Now, do you think that radio is afraid of podcasts? Because that is where you can find some of the most humble and original talent, is when it's via a podcast. Do you think radio and podcasts will collaborate, or will this end up being a war where podcasts just come out charging and radio will be left confused? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I don't. I mean, it's just, big companies are going to, if they see a talented person, they're going to try to, make money off them.
Yeah.
Like if someone's got, talent and can do, let's say, well, me and Daniel call it improvisational, talk. Basically, it's just, you're talking about topics, you're improving on the spot, you're talking about current events, news, whatever else you're talking about. You're trying to make it funny or entertaining. If you could do that, a big company, there are always going to be iHeartMedia, there are always going to be Cox, there's always going to be these, the big companies. And if they could recognize talent, they're going to just basically say, hey, we want you to provide this entertainment on our signals. And whether it be AM, FM, whether it be internet-based, they're always going to be looking for talent like that. So it's not going to be necessarily a war, because everybody's a human being. Everybody just wants to make as much money as possible. And if someone offers the most talented people the best money, that's where they're going to go. Like, it's not going to be like, well, I'm going to stay here because I make, I'm really funny and I'm really talented, but I'm going to stay here and, like, make, $50,000 when I can make $500,000 if I work. Everybody's going to take the most money offered. It's just going to be a shift where the big companies are going to be like, well, this, like, let's say, your podcast is super popular. I want to hire you to do entertainment on my, like, media platform. Yeah. And then you're going to say, well, either I make this amount of money or I make the amount of money they're offering. So it's not going to ever be a war. It's just going to be, it's going to be a point in time where the big companies realize, like, okay, let me start working with these talented people, or let me offer these talented people, or offer them a deal that they're happy with, instead of the stereotypical radio deal where, hey, we own all the content you ever put out, and we have you under non-compete. And, like, I think that kind of stuff is going to change. Can we curse on the show?
Yeah, say whatever the fuck you want. I never swear that much, but yeah, it's uncensored.
Gotcha. I just wanted to make sure. But yeah, there's going to be shit that changes in the future. But I think that, like, me and Daniel with our show, we kind of, because they probably, when we left radio, they probably said, they're going to go fucking do a podcast. That's stupid shit. It's some small piddly thing. And me and Daniel have the ability, and we are in the position to make more money than we could have ever done in radio. So it's not just, we turned down a big time radio gig. It's, hey, we went into a different avenue in a different media platform, but you could make the same amount of money. It's out there. People are doing it. The big podcasters out there are making millions, and, me and Daniel are making that, but we're at least, making what we could have made doing terrestrial radio.
How does it feel that you guys are free and you are allowed to do what you want? Because you guys had to work with some egos in the past, and I have had to as well. And it's one of those things where you don't feel like yourself when you're on the air because you're sort of on a leash and you're being told what to do. So does it feel like freeing that you guys can do whatever the fuck you want on your show?
It's kind of weird because before, when we were doing morning show, we didn't really have the management that would kind of tell us what we can and can't do.
Yeah.
So I got to give it to these guys, that were our management in the past. They never really micromanaged and said like, hey, I don't think what you're doing is funny, or you should go this way, or let's sit down and see what the ratings say at individual times. Like, is this, it was kind of like, just let us do what we want to do. And if it's not working, then maybe they'd say something. So I never really dealt with that kind of restriction. That was never really the problem. So, but then again, the fact that we can do whatever we want to do is definitely a freeing feeling. And, we don't have to deal with FCC. You don't have to deal with any sort of sponsors, like that's the thing too. Like, you work in radio, you make all your money primarily based on sponsors. So everything lives and dies by what the sponsors say. If you got, a big sponsor like McDonald's or, Sony or whatever the hell, like a big ass sponsor, if they don't like what you're saying, they're going to put pressure on you to not say whatever you're saying. So like, there is that aspect of it, which is cool about podcasting. And what me and Daniel kind of figured out is, we could do a dual-based revenue source, which one is advertising and the other is, revenue based upon subscriptions. So half of our, revenue that we make through podcasting is based on subscriptions. It's based on our fans. So, in the best case scenario, it would be you have a totally subscription-based podcast. That way it would be like HBO. You have like, John Oliver. I watch his show all the time. He's constantly making fun of like McDonald's and Bud Light or Bud Light Lime and all the big sponsors. And you're like, holy shit, that's weird. Like you never see that before because you're like, wow, this guy's making fun of the biggest, advertisers in the game. And it's shocking because you would never see that anywhere else because you're like, oh, why? Like, how is he's making fun of fucking Budweiser and he's making fun of McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, like all these big sponsors, but he could do it because HBO's revenue is based like primarily on the fans. So it's a little bit refreshing watching a show that their revenue is, entirely based on like your fans and the people subscribing to HBO. So with podcasting, it would be great if it was all like HBO subscription based, but it's not like that. And so you have to do, a little bit of subscribers, a little bit of subscription. But what's good about that is that it's not only based on advertisers. So, when, you could kind of get away with saying more because that there's a backup of your listeners that, that will pay to support you.
Now, I've been doing this show for 6 months, and it has grown so much because guys like Mike Calta and Drew Garabo and the BDRS, they have played my work on air. And whenever they talk about me, people look up my show because I see it via the things on WordPress where it shows what people looked up. But what I'm getting at is I don't have enough fans where people could subscribe and pay for my show, but I have been looking to find ways to get sponsors. So what is some advice you have for me and podcasts out there where we're not big enough where people would pay for our show yet, but we do want to get sponsors? So how should we go about this?
Well, you're probably be surprised. You probably have a certain amount of listener base that would be willing to pay for like extra content. You never want to charge for all your shows. Back, 10 years ago, Ricky Gervais had a podcast had like 300,000 listeners or 200,000 listeners. And he's like, oh, shit, if I just charge $1 for every episode, I make like fucking $200,000 a week or whatever. So he started doing that, and only, I think 10% or less were willing to even pay $1 per episode. So it was one of the initial business failures in podcast history, because he didn't realize, like, he thought $1 was nothing, but to the podcast listeners, $1 was like a shit. That's a lot of money to pay for an hour show, like $1 per episode is a lot. So he failed in recognizing the amount, the demand amount for his podcast. If he would probably charge $1 a month, he probably would have more success. So going towards, like, let's say your listeners, I think the universal standard is about 15%, 10 to 15% of your listeners are hardcore enough that would be willing to pay a monetary amount for extra content. So if you go about that, so you got like 10% of your listeners that are willing to pay for subscriptions, and then the rest of your majority of listeners, then you go towards, advertising route, just like everybody else. Everybody else is like, all right, I got a bunch of listeners. Companies will pay to advertise their message to them. And then it goes to, podcast listeners are so loyal and engaged that you don't have to have the same numbers as stereotypically radio or TV has, where you're like, oh, I have 100,000 listeners or I have 200,000 listeners. So I always, a lot of people ask me, a lot of podcasts start up and ask me, well, how do I make money? I have 500 listeners, and they're like, that's nothing. I can never do anything with that. And I'm like, you're wrong. If you have 500 dedicated listeners to your podcast a week, and a bar, a lot of places would be willing to pay $100 for you to run a commercial on your show. So, because if you got 500 listeners, if 20 of those listeners go to that bar, then it is way worth $100 to that bar for 20 people to come to that bar and spend $20. Because now, they spend $400 at that bar, and it only costs that bar $100 for advertising. So that bar is like, wow, what a great return on investment.
Yeah.
So you don't have to have the 100,000. Like, so if you have a podcast with 500 listeners, you could charge $100 a commercial, and let's say, you do your podcast every week, and that's $500 a week. That's pretty good money for doing, like, let's say you did a half an hour podcast a week on your spare time. Now you're making $500 a week for what? The price of, an MP3 recorder, or, nowadays you can get a good quality sound for pretty cheap. So, you're making $500 a week and you're doing a podcast a night. That's pretty good money. Like, and let's say you gain some more listeners, you're making $1,000 a week. Now you're making $50,000 a year, which is more money than most people make in radio for sure. I mean, when I worked in radio, like, I left after 10 years, my base salary was $35,000. So, you're talking about the opportunity to make a lot of money. A lot of people think, oh, let me get in radio, I'll make a shit ton of money. But, everybody knows, well, not everybody, but a lot of people know in radio, you don't fucking make any money. Like, you have to work there a long time. You have to be the host of a show. There's a lot of different things that have to happen. I did 10 years, and I left there, making $35,000 base salary. Of course, like with promotions and other stuff, you end up making double that. But as far as what they've promised you, it's not that much. So the answer is, I'm sorry, I talk a lot, but the answer is you can make a good amount of money, and you don't have to have that many listeners. If you have 500 dedicated listeners, shit, if you had 50 dedicated listeners that were willing to do, support any of your sponsors, they would see, they'd be like, holy shit, I had 50 people come into my bar. That's a lot of people,
Yeah.
I used to work, when I worked in radio, I would do promotions where bars would pay a ton of money, and I'd show up, and 5 people would show up. So it all matters. It doesn't really matter how many people you are exposed to, how many people are willing to support you, and use your listeners' products or services or whatever. That's what really counts, and I think that's what advertisers are realizing.
What is the key to approaching a potential sponsor and getting them to join your show? Do you go to a bar and just ask for the manager? Do you email someone? Like, what are some of the best ways to find them? Like, my show would probably reach 25 to 54 dudes that go to bars, maybe dudes that go to adult sex shops, just because I give my listeners from 102.5 The Bone, and that's their demographic. So should I go to a sex shop and just say, do you guys want to be a sponsor, or every bar in downtown St. Pete? Or is there another way to approach it?
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do, don't be afraid to give away your, advertising for free at first.
Yeah.
There's, when I was first looking for advertisers on our podcast, we weren't proven. Like, everybody was like, what's a pod nest? Like, no one knows, and still to this day, no one, there's a lot of people that don't understand podcasting and don't know what it is. They're used to, traditional terrestrial radio, outdoor advertising, print, and, TV. There's basically like the 4 major outlets. But so there's plenty of advertisers that I've been to, and I said, listen, we're going to do an event here. We're, like any bar, no bar is going to turn down an event or like turn down a private party or like bringing people to the bar. And then you can go to like, hey, we're going to do something here. Most bars will give a discount. Like, even if you were Joe Schmo and said like, hey, I'm having my fantasy football party here and there's going to be 50 people or whatever the fuck, like, they'll be like, okay, well, we'll give $2 draft beer. So they'll just give some, special, because every bar has a liquor rep or a beer rep that they can get, free stuff off of. So you go to a bar and you say, hey, my podcast is going to do a meetup here or an event here. So can you, give me a good deal for my listeners? And every bar will do that. They don't want to ever put out money, but they'll do that. But it's your way in, because then you do that and you tell your listeners like, hey, I'm doing, an event here at this bar, and they're offering $2 draft beers for my listeners only. So then your listeners go down and you get, let's say you get 30 people there. So you get 30 people there, and then the bar owner's like, oh, shit, that's 30 people, like, spending fucking money. They're spending $20, $30 a piece. Like, that's pretty good money. And then you go to the master and you be like, hey, this is something I could do once a month. And then the bar owner is going to be like, all right, let's make a deal. Like, what do I need to make this happen? And then you say, well, $250, I'll read a commercial on my podcast. These are my listeners, whatever. And then next thing you know, you're making $250 a month just on that thing. So that's how it all starts. And then, then from that, like, other businesses talk to each other. Like, you give away a lot of stuff for free just to show them your power. As long as you have some advertising power and you have some dedicated listeners, the people will listen. And like, that's how we started getting advertisers at first. Like, oh shit, like, a lot of people listen to Tom and Dan. Like, this is a great return on investment, because that's the name of the game. If I'm spending $500 a month, am I getting $500 back from whatever media source I'm advertising on? So a lot of stuff, like, don't be afraid to just go there and like, hey, let me prove to you that I have listeners. Let me prove to you that my listeners will spend money in your place. So, you can start off doing it that way. And then once that happens, then once you get to a certain point, then you could just, name your price and people will pay it. Because as you know, working in radio and we've spent on I-4, we bought a billboard this year on I-4. That shit was $1,000 a week, and like, that's expensive, like, you're talking about $1,000 a week, and we ran that for 7 weeks, And at the end of the time, we couldn't really determine whether that was – it didn't really help us with listeners. Like as you know, in podcasting, you could look at your data and see how many listeners, so we run, $7,000 promotion on a billboard on I-4. It didn't really increase our listeners at all. What it did help is a lot of advertisers looked at us and said, shit, these guys have enough money to, pay for a billboard. Maybe we should take them seriously. So it helps us get advertisers, but it didn't help us with listeners. So if you're a business, if running a billboard on I-4 is spending $7,000, or running an ad on your podcast, and if you get 30 people a month in your bar, shit, the better money is spent running an ad on your podcast. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot of other media and like advertising outlets that are not as good as far as return on investment than even podcasts are. And I think a lot of businesses are realizing that.
Now, how did you guys design your website? Because it's so easy to figure out. Because if you go to hopperadio.com, I reinvented it and I refixed it, but it's not really that good. So do you hire somebody to help you with the website? Because I want to be able to monetize and make it as easy as possible for a potential listener. Because the average attention span is like 2 seconds. So if they don't get your website, they're just going to move on in this new age of everyone having ADHD. So do you have your own company that helps build that great website, or did somebody from your show make that?
No, it's funny because originally Daniel's a tech guy with our show. Like I don't know, I could barely go on our fucking business bank account, and like I forget my password, and then I'm calling the fucking lady. She's telling me what is your grandfather's maiden name, and I'm like, God damn it, I forgot what the hell. Like, I'm horrible with technology. So Daniel made our original website, and then we were lucky in the fact that when we started, close to 7 years ago now, we had a bunch of people that started listening to us, and like friends and friends of friends that were offering to help us because they believed in us. So our website's built by a company called DivUps, and they kind of like, it was their first time ever. Like, they left a big corporation and started doing working on their own. And they sorry, I'm burping because I had a couple IPAs tonight. I apologize. So they left their company, and they said, we believe in what you guys are doing. We'll help you build a website. Our branding agency, Danger Brain, they helped us brand everything, which I didn't understand at first, but now that they've taught me the ways of branding, I'm 100%, branding is the best thing you could do for yourself. And the fact that everything that we do, people see and they're like, oh, that's Tom and Dan. Their colors, our font, the way our art looks, it's just, it all comes together. So, having all your branding together is fine, even if it comes with getting a logo. But our website is done by DivUps, and they do a great job, and they helped us since the beginning. So, and our buddy Joe helped us with an app. But now, even with apps, with Google Play, as you know, Google Play is coming out and as an answer to iTunes for Android users. So now, if you can get your stuff on iTunes, which you obviously know how to, you get your stuff on Google Play, which is basically the iTunes of Android phones. Now everybody who has a smartphone can listen to any podcast you do. So, as long as you can upload your MP3s on iTunes and Google Play, really your website, it's great for advertisers. It's great to have a home base. It's great to have a blog. But if you want people listening to your show, as long as you can get it on iTunes and Google Play now, then every single person with a smartphone can listen to your show. And that's what you want, because that's what ease of people listening is the way to do it. Like, obviously a great looking website like we have is good and it helps us a lot. But if people can listen to your show easily through their iPhone or smartphone, then you're good to go. Like, that's all you need.
Dude, I'm sure you've seen this since you've been doing the show for 7 years. But when you have it on iTunes and you have to tell them to subscribe or go to TuneIn and subscribe, nobody ever fucking subscribes. But I have an app both in iTunes and Google Play. And now my listens are through the roof, and so are the downloads. Isn't it so amusing how in this day and age, if you use the word app, all of a sudden everyone treats the show so much better and your listens go through the roof?
Yeah, because apps, Daniel said a long time ago, apps are the new website. If you have an app, then, you're good to go. Like, you just go on your phone. I mean, it makes sense. Like, everybody's got a smartphone. You're just like, okay, I want to listen to what I want to listen to. Let me click this and hit play. Like, everybody's lazy. Everybody's been lazy since forever, thousands of years. So, like, whatever the easiest way to listen to, that's why radio, has been, so successful for so long, because it's like you get in your car and you just turn on the dial and you just listen to your car. But if you get in your car and, I just got a new car recently, and now I get in my car and the last podcast that I was listening to automatically, links up to my Bluetooth and starts playing. So now, now that it's that easy, well, shit, why the fuck am I going to listen to terrestrial radio anymore or whatever? Like, I get in my car and the last podcast I listened to automatically starts playing on my fucking radio. And then you're like, okay, well, there it is. Like, that's the future. If, no one's going to regress backwards. Like, I'm not going to get in my car and then my phone is playing on the speakers and I'm going to be like super pissed off about it. I'm going to be like, well, fuck this. I want to listen to staticky AM radio. Like, like if anybody thinks you're going to go backwards from that, my sons, I got 2 sons, they're not even going to know what AM and FM radio is. There's no way they're going to get into their car 15 years from now and then be like, you know what, I'm going to listen to some good old AM and FM radio. They're going to be like listening to whatever the fuck they want to, globally, on whatever their personal computing device is. I don't see how that's going to be different than what I think it is. I mean, I'd love for someone to be like, no, and there'll probably be some like super niche AM and FM radio. Like, I always made the joke, AM and FM radio are going to eventually go to like, the hipsters, and there's going to be like a certain sect of society that's going to be wanting to listen to AM and FM radio. And they're going to have like their tower and listen to AM and FM, and there's going to be like, it's going to take over by like privateers back like it used to be back in the day. But all the big corporations are going to go towards Wi-Fi. All the big corporations are going towards right now. Like, hey, let me broadcast my signal on Wi-Fi so I could reach the most amount of people. I mean, unless you think that I'm wrong or someone else like can give me a good argument about, I think terrestrial radio or AM and FM radio is going to prevail through the next 20 years. I just doubt that that'll happen, Now, the thing that everybody's, like you, me, anybody who starts a podcast, how are you going to have marketing power?
Yeah.
That's the thing, and that's the thing that big companies have. They have marketing power. And that goes back to our original question is there going to be a podcast war between podcasters and big corporations? No, because the big corporations are going to pick all the talented people all out and then say, oh, we'll pay you to produce your talent through whatever venue that we're doing. It was probably going to be like a Wi-Fi mix between terrestrial and apps and things like that. So, that if you're good at what you do, that will make you money, and that will always be the case. It's not going to be like one medium towards another, like terrestrial towards podcast or Wi-Fi. Everybody's going towards Wi-Fi, and that doesn't matter. If you're talented, you'll make money, no matter what you do. Like if you're a talented actor, if you're a talented stand-up comedian, whatever you do, if you get in front of the right people, they will pay you to do that on whatever they are producing or are putting out there. So, that's the name of the game. It's just be good at what you do, and you will make money doing it.
Dude, what I love about listening to you talk and listening to the show is you guys put in so much effort, so much prep, and so much passion into each show. Now, I'm not throwing any shows ever in radio under the bus, but there are some shows that just turn on the mic and just talk. So how does it feel that you guys won Best Local Radio Show in Orlando and you guys aren't even on the radio?
Well, the whole thing about putting in a lot of, preparation is kind of off because we came from a venue where you just turn on the mic. Like, if you come from terrestrial radio, and terrestrial radio, and it may sound like I'm talking shit about terrestrial radio. I'm not, because like I have a lot of friends that do terrestrial radio. Like I still listen to terrestrial radio every once in a while. Like it's funny because I'm listening to like XM Sirius because I got a new car, and I was listening to Howard Stern, and and then it's like that is all good. But when you do 5 hours a day, you have to just turn on the mic and just talk. So that's what me and Daniel have always done, is to just turn on the mic and just talk. And we found that we work best when we just turn on the mic and talk. And now that probably came from, us working together for 10 plus years, just turning on the mic and talking. So it helped us because there was no prep or anything. Like we didn't have to, do a lot of, show prep and like, hey, what are we going to talk about? How is this joke going to be or whatever? We just turn on the mic and then we just improv the entire time. So I would suggest that if you want to make it easier on yourself, you just start doing that and you start improvising as much as possible until you get to a point where you can, create entertaining content just by talking shit with someone else or just talking and improvising as much as possible. So, so that kind of thing, like, me and Daniel don't really prepare as much. Now, here's the thing. With interviews, though, we do. Yeah. We have a lot of comedians and people that come in from our local improv, and I like to listen to a lot of their interviews and research a lot about them because I feel like it'll be a better interview if I know what questions to ask that will lead them to tell an entertaining story. So in that aspect, like I do still respect like a lot of the old school guys that did the research on interviews. So, we do prepare a lot more with interviews and things like that. But as far as everything else, like a lot of times we'll just turn on the mic and like, oh, let's see what happens. We'll have a couple topics. Notoriously our show, we have like a list of topics and we never get to them. We just end up talking shit about a bunch of other things. So, as far as preparing, we're not preparing more than any other show. There's a lot of shows that prepare way more than us. It's just, me and Daniel, we've worked together for so many years. I think, we just have that relationship in which it ends up being, entertaining to some people, not everybody though. Like we're in a fucking, who are we? Like there's a lot better shows than us. I'm sure your show is way more entertaining to a lot of your listeners than I am, or a lot of your listeners are going to listen to our show and be like, "That's a hunk of shit." Yeah, and that's what it is. That's a good thing about it, though. It's like it doesn't like. I always willing to do any other podcast and always willing to support any other podcast because it's like, hey, this is not some sort of like war of like, you better not listen to this podcast because our podcast is better. Like now with on-demand listening, you know, you can listen to any podcast. I promote podcasts on our show all the time, you know, probably to the detriment. I talk about this podcast called Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. And it's a really good podcast about history. And a lot of our listeners are like, man, I've started binge listening to this podcast because it's awesome. I love it. I haven't even listened to your podcast. Like, I don't care. Like, it's good. And guess what? You're going to listen to our podcast eventually or whatever. We'll want to, like, change it up and listen to another one. Like, the good thing about on-demand listening is you're not – or with podcasts is you're not really in competition with anybody because, you know, people can listen to our podcast, your podcast, you know, Mark Maron's podcast, whatever they want to on their own time. So you don't have to get into some radio war thing. It's just like, hey, you know, listen to what you want to listen to, you know?
Why do you think radio brings out so much egos in people? Because what I love about 102.5 The Bone is it's a big family. Everybody gets along. But why do you think people talking into the mic, no matter how much you make, why does it get to their heads? Because at the end of the day, you're the lowest on the totem pole when it comes to being a celebrity. So why does radio bring out so much ego?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think it all depends on the person you are. You know, like if you're an egomaniac, they used to say, you know, people used to say everybody in radio has an ego or you wouldn't be in radio. And I used to say, I don't have a fucking ego. I literally, and maybe I do, I just don't know, but I just say I have no ego. I don't give two shits about like what people think I am, or like I never look at anything negative on Facebook or like people like, you know, I'm sure plenty of people hate me, think I'm fucking unentertaining and everything, like, but I have no idea about that because I never look at it. So I don't know, but I'm guessing that radio and anything produces an ego when you want to be in entertainment and you do a job where your job is people listening to what you say. Yeah. That's eventually going to create some sort of ego. You're like, hey, you know, I got thousands of people listening to what I say. So, you know, now what I say is important. You know, when before, if you work at fucking Best Buy and you're in the fucking car audio department and you're talking to your buddy and you're like, hey, like, how much did you get that weed for? And they're telling you, and they're like, you know what? I'm going to tell you my personal opinion on politics now. Then that guy's not going to give two shits. So you're like, all right. But if you're on fucking radio, now all of a sudden, like, you know, thousands of people are listening to what you say and what your opinion on politics. So now it's important. When basically you're the same guy that worked at Best Buy. Like, it's funny, like radio, anybody, we all fucking like, well, shit, I don't know, what did you do? Like, I used to work at Home Depot. I worked at Foot Locker, actually Champs. So I'm basically a Champs employee, a Home Depot employee that's now, like, I was on the radio and now I'm doing a podcast. But that's my history. Like, what the fuck do I know about politics or anything else? Like, the only thing that people know is that I have now a voice because I'm on a popular podcast. So, like, anybody else, you take anybody else, everybody had a past. Everybody worked at fucking a sub shop or some shit, like a, you know, whatever they did, and now they're on the radio. So no one's got, like, a pedigree of, like, they were groomed for radio or podcasting through their whole life. Everybody's just some fucking dude that got this job or that stuck around long enough to get their job, and now they're just saying what they feel like. I mean, they're not fucking a political analyst or anything like that. Most people on radio that I know or podcasting, whatever, just, you know, got into this because they like doing it and whatever, but they worked some bullshit job before. So, like, I don't understand what that ego is because none of us are, you know, a professional. I can understand if you're like a fucking physicist and you're doing a podcast on, some sort of science or stars or, the universe, that you would have an ego. But if you're some dude that worked, stocking shoes or worked at Publix for a while, and then you fucking got into radio and did an internship for 3 years and then worked your way up, and now 10 years later you're the host of a show. Now you're telling people what your opinion on Obama is, and you have this huge ego about it. Like, what the fuck are you? It's really ridiculous, but I don't know why that is, but it's probably because human psychology is like, if you have a bunch of people listening to you, you're going to have an ego because a bunch of people listen to you and they tell you how good you are. That's why I always say, like, no matter what you do, you should have a bunch of friends that tell you you're a piece of shit. Because I got a bunch of friends from Miami that no matter what I do and no matter what podcast I do or whatever, how many people listen to me, every time I see them, they're just like, you are know-nothing piece of shit. So you have to have those people that tell you that you're nothing, because that'll help your ego a lot. It'll help you, oh, yeah, I am just a nothing, I'm a fucking know-nothing piece of shit. And I think that helps everybody. Like, you have some stable friends that constantly tell you that what your opinion is bullshit, and you shouldn't believe your own hype, and you're just some, podcast piece of shit. That will help you a lot.
Now, what I like about what you just said is basically you have to have a second life and not just have radio take you over. What I like to do in my free time is work out. I love watching HBO Go, and I love watching Aqua Teen Hunger Force. What are some things you like to do in your free time?
Well, I used to have free time, but now I have 2 kids.
Yeah.
And that basically is all my, 100% of my time. So, and then once you get into podcasting, when I was in radio, I got off, you do 6 a.m. to 11, you do an hour of production work, and then you're out at 12. You have a ton of time. But now that, you get into podcasting, you got to do everything, not only the shows, but the promotion, the events, the website, everything. So you're working 9 to 5. And then after that, I got kids now. So it's just basically, come home, you get the 2 kids. I'm lucky enough to have, I got a nanny, so she does a lot of stuff. But she's asking what the fuck this fleshlight is that she found in the bathroom, and what this vase that has a weird, smelly hole in it that's where marijuana goes into. She's asking me all types of questions. Then my wife gets home. She's yelling at me, telling me that, I need to do, more stuff. So anyway, I've now have zero free time. So I don't literally do anything. You're lucky. You're young.
Yeah.
You got your whole life ahead of you. Like, you're good to go. You're going to have a successful podcast. I could tell already. You got your shit together. You got the right hookups. You're over there in Tampa, which is a way bigger market. We're over here in stinky Orlando, small ass podunk market. You're good to go. You'll be more successful than we will ever be.
Do you think there are a lot of people out there that are going to be like the next big thing in radio? Like, I try to keep it humble. I have so many people say that I'm the future of radio, and I keep it humble, but that motivates me. And I'm not even trashing my generation, but there's so many people, and it's not in this building, and I'm not just saying that. There's so many people online that just think that they can just do a crappy show and that it's going to get out there. So do you think that my generation is going to make an impact in radio, or are we all just a bunch of lazy pieces of shit? Because I kind of have a weird vibe about the millennials.
It's not going to be, I don't know. Like, I don't think there's going to be a future. Like, it's funny because I was listening to like, I got satellite XM in my car for the first time in a long time. So I was listening to Howard Stern. He's talking about, he's got his whack pack in there. He's got, like, some guy, like a high pitched dude, and he's got like a bunch of, and he's just doing the whole thing. And I'm like, this is just 90s radio that everybody's mimicking from the 90s, like, and people still do it. Me and Daniel joke around about tasing your intern's balls and, shooting someone with paintballs. And like,
dude,
just like,
guess what? When I worked for a show in Cleveland, they put pubic hair on my face. How original.
Yeah. It's all the pube, smoke these pubes.
Yeah.
We make all these jokes. I came from that. Like, and here's the thing, like, I did it. I'm talking this shit, but I did this as Drunky the Bear. Like, I don't know, if your listeners, if you want to look up Drunky the Bear on YouTube,
yeah,
you'll see all the dumb shit I did. And like, and that's what it did. Like, I started in 2003, and that was, at that time, that was the way you got into radio. Like, you become an intern, you got someone tase your balls, or you fucking jump Gravedigger, or you smoke some pubes, and then you work your way on, and then eventually 8 years later you'll be making $30,000 a year. Like, and that was the business. And then like 10 years after that, 18 years into it, possibly you can make 100 plus a year or whatever it is. But so gosh, shit, I forgot your original question, but it was the same for a while. I doubt that it's going to be that in the future. Like, I can't see, people, although, when someone smokes some pubes, it's funny, but you can't you can't build a entertainment base off of that. I just don't see that as being the future. Like, we joke around about 90s radio. Like,
yeah.
It really is. Like, there's a lot of shows that were started in the 90s that are still out there. I know. And everybody's in the almost 50 now. But I think there's going to be, like, the new shows are, what the new shows are. Like, you see them out there. You see all the podcasts out there. You see all the entertainment out there. And it's going to be so – I remember your original question. There's not going to be, in my opinion, a new Howard Stern. Like, Howard Stern in the 90s was like, oh, he's everywhere. He's the biggest thing. He's the king of media and stuff like that. It's just like how MASH was the biggest rated show, the biggest rated show finale at the time. It was like, okay, MASH does that mean it's the best show? No. It means that there was, 15 other shows as an option. That was it. There wasn't 200 other shows. Like, the biggest band, like Elvis was the king of rock and roll at one time, and Michael Jackson was the king of pop, and there was, because there was only no one ever knew anything but 15 other pop music bands. So Michael Jackson was a king, and Elvis was a king, and like the biggest, Metallica was big back in the 90s, and all this other shit. Now, the game's changed. Now if you like rock music, okay, there are 200,000 rock bands. Now, if you break it down into what genre you like, do you like, punk rock? Do you like hardcore? Do you like regular, indie rock? Do you like, pop music rock? Do you, like, there's now you're breaking down 50 different types of rock. So like everything is so segmented now. There's never going to be that one big show. And that's what I'm like, going back to podcasts and our conversation, you don't need to have 100,000 listeners. That's ridiculous. The biggest podcast in the world, the Mark Maron that Obama went on, he probably has 200,000 listeners, which I doubt if it's even that much per episode. He probably ranges around 80 to 100,000 listeners an episode. So it's like, Joe Rogan or Adam Carolla and stuff like that. It's not the biggest. It's not what people think is you're not going into the hundreds of thousands or millions anymore. So if you just have your segment of listeners, you can make a living off that, no problem.
Yeah.
I tell people, just get to 1,000 listeners. If you have 1,000 dedicated listeners, you can make a living off that.
What do you think about this? I don't want to brag, but altogether throughout 3 years, I have 52,000 listens and 12,000 downloads.
That's a lot, and that's a shit that you can make a living off of that. Like, you don't have to worry about the next level.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are always looking like, hey, I want to get to this level and this one. I want to be the next, Mark Maron or whatever. Why are you looking at that? Like, what you have accomplished right now is amazing in this particular time in 2015. It's about to be 2016. You have enough listeners to monetize your podcast, to get a couple subscribers, and by a couple, I mean a couple hundred, and you can make a living off what you do right now. And if you want to do that, start right now. You go to whoever, if you know someone who owns a bar, if you know anybody that owns a business, go to them and say like, hey, I have this many listeners. Pay me $150 to read a commercial. Just start with that. And they'll be like, well, they know if you advertise in the newspaper, it's more than $150. So they're like, well, is this going to give me some? Yes, it will. And if it doesn't, or will this give me customers? And then like, yes, it will. If it doesn't, I'll give you your money back. I've done that before. And then be like, well, that sounds like a good deal. I will pay you $150. Then your next show, you advertise with them, $150, and you bring some listeners into their place. They see some return on their investment, and then all of a sudden they're like, all right, cool. I will spend that money every month. Now you're making $150 a month. You do that more and more and more. 6 months down the line, you're making $1,000 a month. Well, that's $12,000 a year. Now you make $2,000 a month. That's 20. It just starts adding up.
Yeah,
and that's how everything starts. And you're like, well, shit. I'm making more money than I was at my fucking job, so I'm going to quit my job and put all my money or all my effort towards this. It's as easy as that. It is as easy as that. It can happen. That's no problem. You just have to go out there and talk to people and be like, hey, let me prove this,
Dude, before I let you go, because I'm literally mind fucked. You literally fucked my mind. It's just, so much about podcasts, man. It's inspiring because it was one of those things where I was trying to compare myself to Mark Maron or Adam Carolla. And it's just I never thought about everything I've accomplished going on 10 p.m. in November 10th. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Here's the thing. Don't we're not. Our show is never going to be close to Mark Maron and Adam Carolla. It's never going to be that. They've been in the industry for so long. They've had so much national Adam Carolla's. He's been on Loveline. He's been on The Man Show, which is a nationally syndicated show. He's been on Dancing with the Stars. He's been on Celebrity Apprentice. He's done all these national, of course he's big, but he also has, here's the thing, he also has 25 employees, and he's got his overhead is probably, a couple $100,000 a month to create what. So if you have a podcast and your overhead is $100 a month, then if you make $1,000 a month, you're making, $900 a month. So if you just break it down to straight business terms, if your overhead is small, then you can make money. And that's the thing that me and Daniel we're not going to ever be the Adam Carolla, the Mark Maron, or, the Joe Rogans, or the biggest podcast in the world, but their overhead is a lot bigger, and they also have national exposure. If you don't have that, then go to local. You can go to Mons Venus, the local strip club, and say, hey, I want to do a show, a meetup here with my listeners, and you get them to, create a deal where you get half off door price or whatever, and you bring them a bunch of customers, they're going to say, oh, shit, this podcast brought me a bunch of listeners. Next time I'll pay them $200 to say that. So, Tampa's a huge market. You got a lot of opportunity to make money just by going to local businesses and saying, hey, I got a lot of listeners, and if you don't believe in me, then we'll do the first one for free. and then just prove yourself. You
Yeah.
know, and then after that, then you say, well, the next one's going to cost you some money. But you could definitely make money, and, you know, there's no reason that anybody doing podcasts that has over 1,000 listeners couldn't make, you know, at least $500 a show if they put their, put their mind to it and put some work into it. You can make $500 a show, and that's pretty good money.
Now, before I let you go, where do you see your show in the next 5 years? You guys have accomplished so much in the last 7 years. Where do you see it, and where do you want to see it?
It's kind of weird. It's complicated because, you know, we do a podcast. It's also broadcast on terrestrial radio. So I looked at like getting that show out to a bunch of different other outlets and getting more listeners to the podcast, because the podcast has always been our bread and butter and also our passion. So if we want to just get as many people listening to podcasts as possible. So really in 5 years, like, we have a growth pattern that we've now, you know, looked at, and we said, okay, we can analyze our growth in the next 5 years to be this. So in the next 5 years, I'd like to be making double, triple than I am now. But
Yeah.
I wouldn't be disappointed if I'm making the same that I am now, just in the fact that I'm just doing what I wanted to be doing, and I have there's no one that can tell me what I can and can't do. I have no boss. I'm doing the content we want. You know, me and Daniel just come up with the shit that we want to come up with and what we think is funny. We put it out there. You know, we cater to our listeners and only to our listeners. We always think of our listeners first. So we're doing a lot of stuff that we've always wanted to do in entertainment, which is like, hey, let's make our listeners happy. You know, obviously our sponsors are important as well, but we never think of our sponsors first. And I came from a world where we were always worried about our sponsor first, and like, oh, if a sponsor doesn't like that, you know, we can't do it or whatever. So it's like, you think about entertainment first, and then everything else will be good. So in 5 years, I'd just like to be making a good living, continuing to do what I want to do. And then as long as that happens and we're happy, I think, you know, everything will be, you know, great at that point.
And now, where can people find your work online and via their phones?
Simple. TomandDan.com is our website. If we got an app on iTunes and Android. It's called a Mediocre app. Fuck that up. I'm horrible at promoting. It's called Mediocre app. But if you go to TomandDan.com, you can find all our shit there. You know, and our terrestrial radios, you can find on iTunes at a corporate time. If you just search that on iTunes, it'll be on Google Play too. But if you just go on TomandDan.com, you'll find everything.
Dude, I'm not kidding when I say you could write a dummy's book to doing a podcast, man. You've inspired me, you've influenced me, and you've changed the way I look at the game and I look at my show. So it's been an honor to have you on Happy Hour, my man.
Yeah, dude, I appreciate it, man. Like, I was literally probably going to tell you this. My original plan was to just call you when I'm on my way home from work.
Yeah.
And I was going to tell you all this stuff because people ask me all the time, like, how do I, I want to start a podcast. How do I do it? And I tell them the same thing I literally told you. And I usually take too long, and my wife yells at me when I'm in the driveway talking on my phone because she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm just trying to tell this person how to do it because I don't care. I'll tell everybody. It's no secret. I want everybody to know, like, hey, you could do this. And I am not like there, me and Daniel, we never worry about like, what if you get more popular than us? Like, I don't care about that shit. Like, hey, I want everybody to go out there and do, and have the most, like, put out entertainment. And if people, whatever they want to listen to is whatever they're going to listen to. Like, I'm not worried about competition. So, I would have told you this, whether it's on your show or I would have called you on my phone personally. So, I hope other people listen to this and start their podcasts and start doing what they want to do because, and I feel like you could do this even if you worked in terrestrial radio or worked in another job, because it makes you a happier person because you're putting out what you want to put out. A lot of people work at jobs or do shows or whatever. They feel like stifled and they feel like they're not doing what they want to do. So I feel like podcasting is a therapy to a lot of people. And, if everybody did it, even if they worked in terrestrial radio or other, venues, it's better for the business because they get it all off their chest,
Well, dude, keep up the good work, man. You've changed the way I view everything.
Yeah, well, dude, I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on your show, man. I appreciate it. Anytime, one day we'll have you on our show, and we'll fucking do it up, man.
That would be an honor, man. I do plan on trying to come down sometime because I do want to go to any of the 9 theme parks you have in town. So whenever I do come to Orlando, I will hit you guys up.
Yeah, no problem, dude. Anytime. Just you got my cell phone number now, so call me.
Sounds good. Have a great night, Tom.
You too, dude.
All right, bye.
See ya.
Wow. Where do I even begin? I've always looked up to Tom and Dan. I've always loved what Daniel Dennis does and what Tom Vann does for the show. I mean, they're one of my favorite podcasts. But, I mean, he just changed the way I look at the game overall. I mean, this dude could write a dummies book to Podcast 101. I mean, anything can happen in this life, and that's basically the overall message I took from listening to him talk. So if there's any Tom and Dan fans who listen to this segment and they want to hear more about Happy Hour, it's not hard. I have a mobile app too, so you can listen to my show anywhere in the world. If you're in Auckland, New Zealand, you're in China, Gary, Indiana, Orlando, Tampa Bay, Chicago, anywhere. All you have to do is go to the Google Play and the iTunes app shop. Search up Hoppe Radio. You can hear all 31 interviews I've conducted since July, all the rants I conduct, including my new co-host, Kyle Viet. And when I do a show live via Spreaker, you can chat me. Also, check out hopperadio.com if there's anybody out there that wants to help me monetize it or has any upgrades or ideas. It's hopperadio.com. You can get into contact with me, Ryan at hopperadio.com. And as you can tell, I'm kind of plugging my brand. So it's at Ryan Hoppe Radio on Twitter. This has been Happy Hour. Shout out to Tom Vann from A Mediocre Time with Tom and Dan for coming on Happy Hour. This was an absolute blast. Peace out, folks.
Happy Hour. Happy Hour.
This is an official broadcast of Hoppe Radio. For more info, check out hopperadio.com and hoppesworld.com.